Breaking the Code with Gabriella tells the story of a young girl who overcomes gender stereotypes in robotics, cementing herself as a role model for young women. The book includes science and engineering information, such as the design process and Java tutorials. As part of our initiative to empower young girls to pursue their interests in STEM, we are running the Breaking the Code with Gabriella Trailblazers in STEM speaker series, which explores the careers of women in science, technology, engineering, and math. The series aims to dispel gender stereotypes and aid young students in getting advice on how to pursue their own passions. Today, I'm here with Caeley Looney, who's an aerospace engineer currently working as a missions operator engineer at the Firefly Aerospace on the Blue Ghost Lunar Lander, a spacecraft that is designed to deliver 10 payloads to the lunar surface, capture X-ray images of the Earth's magnetosphere, and investigate heat flow from the lunar interior. Looney, Lunar, Looney is the founder and CEO of the Reinvented Magazine, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering young women to pursue their STEM careers. She aims to break boundaries by reinventing the perception of girls in science with the first print magazine for young women in STEM. Now, I'll let you give a brief introduction about yourself, anything about your journey in STEM, your future goals, or your current interests that you think are notable.
So hi, my name is Kaylee. I'm currently working as a mission operations engineer at Firefly Aerospace on our commercial lunar lander called Blue Ghost. Our first mission to land on the moon is set to launch by the end of this year, which is really, really exciting. Before starting at Firefly, I was at a company called L3 Harris for 5 years, working as a space mission analyst on small satellites. And prior to that was in school for aerospace engineering and space systems engineering.
That sounds like a super interesting path you've taken. I know you've graduated with a bachelor's in aerospace engineering from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and a master's in space systems engineering from Johns Hopkins. So, what inspired this passion for space, and how has that interest developed throughout your academic career?
Honestly, I stumbled on space. It wasn't by any means on purpose. I was really involved in first robotics when I was in middle school and high school. I joined an all-girls robotics team, and that helped really encourage me to explore all of my curiosities and passions within engineering. And from there, I took it's like a science research special topics class in my senior year of high school. My teacher knew that I loved robots, so he said, well, why don't we explore that a little bit further? My first semester, I built an underwater ROV, and thought if you like robots on land, let's think about robots that are in the ocean. And I didn't love it for some reason. I thought it was cool, and I kind of enjoyed a little bit of the process, but to me, it wasn't as cool as working on the stuff that I had been working on with my robotics team. And so my teacher said, well, have you thought about the opposite extreme? If you don't like robots that work underwater, what about robots that go to space? And so from there, I learned a little bit more about the Mars rover and really started learning more about all this cool stuff and this cool technology that was being sent to space. And decided that I was going to give this a try and kind of went headfirst into the aerospace industry by jumping right into a bachelor's in aerospace engineering, and I've really just continued to find a deeper and deeper passion for all things space since then.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And it's amazing how, like, a lot of early experiences, especially in middle school and high school, and extracurricular activities like first robotics, which we actually do, um, can really influence your career path.
Yeah, absolutely.
So currently, you're working on the Blue Ghost Lunar Lander, as you mentioned. What does your day-to-day job look like, and what does working on that mission entail?
So my day to day is pretty different every single day. When I first started the job, we were still very heavily into like integration and testing. Our lunar lander is still in our clean room right now. And so a lot of our team was focused on like design reviews and prep reviews. And so what I did for that was develop what we call our mission operations plan. Our mission operations plan is essentially this one ginormous document that outlines every single event and activity that we're expecting the lander to do itself, indoor, whether it's a space event like an eclipse or a blackout, and everything that we might have to do as operators on the ground, all compiled into one document. This also included all of our payload operations. So that came in integrated from a document we call our payload operations plan into our mission operations plan. And that was my core focus for the first couple of months that I started my job. Once we got a little bit further out of the integration phase and we're starting to get into testing, we converted the mission operations plan into procedures. And these procedures are things that our operators can follow during the actual mission. And so right now, with the mission operations plan almost like nearly finalized, since we have a pretty good idea of what we're going to be doing in space at this point, we're taking those procedures and we're testing them. We have our lander in the clean room. We're able to connect to it in our mission operations center. And so I've been sitting on console helping facilitate and lead these tests where we not only are testing the hardware on our lander and saying, these are all of the things that you have to do as the lander, right? Can you actually do them? Can you power things on when I tell you to? Can we support that with our battery power? Can we support that with our solar panels and the power they provide? And we also are at the same time are training our operators to be able to actually operate the vehicle and understand what this series of events looks like, understand what an anomaly might look like on orbit, and train them on how to mitigate those, how to react when they see them, and help them understand a bit more how the lander will actually work once it's in space. One of the craziest things that I've found is that we have been very focused on our very specific subsystems for this whole time. And mission operations, which is what I work in, is this bridge that kind of forces everyone to get into the same room and understand the lander from everyone else's perspective. Because at the end of the day, if something breaks while we're on orbit, it doesn't just impact the single person on that subsystem that it broke, right? If a heater breaks or a heater stops working, there's another component that is no longer getting heat. There's a power issue. There's a bunch of other things that can happen. Prop could need to be involved. And so I'm now trying to work with all of these subsystems through these tests to help them understand what the impacts of their component failing or an anomaly that seems specific to their subsystem, and get them to bridge that gap of like, no, it's actually not specific to you. And kind of act a little bit as a like science communicator in that perspective as well, which is really fun. So some days I spend my time coding or at my computer at my desk writing these procedures. Some days I spend my entire day in our mission operations center just helping facilitate these tests. And some days I'm gowned up and in the clean room working directly on the lander's hardware to help make sure that our procedures match what we're expecting.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. Being able to account for like every scenario, like a failure in one subsystem, and being able to see kind of like mitigate that once you're actually on the moon. So, just out of curiosity, around how many people are working on the lander in total?
Yeah, so we have about 100 people that are working on the lander. Our control room specifically has about 20 seats. So we'll have a fully staffed control room for that for a good bit of the mission, especially all of our critical events. There'll be 20 people on console, and then the other 80 will be kind of backroom support or like swapping in and out on console too.
Yeah, that sounds definitely a big workforce working to make this lander.
Yeah.
So, for young viewers that might be interested in getting into aerospace engineering or like a space adjacent field, what are like prominent career paths in that field, and what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, honestly, it's kind of crazy because um, there are a lot of career paths and a lot of different interests that intersect within like the world of space. And so, I mean, aerospace engineering is probably the most direct way to get into the space industry. However, we also need electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, biologists, doctors even to help with like astronaut activities. Our marketing team has to understand every technical part of our vocabulary so they can convey to the public. We need science communicators, lawyers for space policy. So it's really crazy. If you have a passion for space, but you're not necessarily a passion for aerospace engineering specifically, or just a different kind of engineering or science, there's still a way to get into the space industry. And I think my biggest piece of advice on that front that I've seen personally from the space industry is that above everything else, it's the passion and curiosity that matters. I always kind of like to add, people say like rocket science is hard. That's true. Almost like all engineering and STEM fields are hard, right? But at the end of the day, you can fail a test, you can fail a class, and still become an aerospace engineer because, like I said, once you enter the workforce, what we care about is whether or not you're curious, you're passionate, you're innovative in the way you think. And we don't look at your grades anymore. We look at how motivated and excited you are about the idea of exploring space.
Yeah, that's super inspiring. Being able to take a field you're so passionate about and actually work on it in the future would definitely, you know, really appeal to a lot of young, curious minds. So throughout your career, what challenges have you faced as a woman in what I know is a pretty male-dominated field, engineering and specifically aerospace engineering, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah. I mean, I think any woman in STEM will have a good amount of stories, unfortunately, to tell you on this front, right? You're right, it is still incredibly male dominated, and I think the aerospace industry sometimes has it even worse than others because the space industry is very historically dominated by white men. If you look back at like NASA days, think about how many astronauts are women, how many astronauts are persons of color. It's very far and few between, and we're getting better over time, but it's mostly thanks to the commercial space industry versus the NASA side of things, unfortunately. And so as we're building out these commercial space companies, you're still getting these people who have a ton of knowledge and are some of the smartest people I've ever met coming from like heritage space and the NASA programs and all these defense companies into these smaller companies, like startups and things, and they're bringing their brains with them, which is great, but they're also bringing their historical, like biased views with them as well. And so I have found many a time that I have to work extra hard, that there's a double standard between me and some of my male coworkers, that what I do has to be done 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times better than some of my coworkers just to show that I am, up on the same par as others. One specific example from, some of my past experiences was that I had a mentor who was a male in STEM and he was amazing. However, uh, on the program I was working on, I would do all of this work. I would do my analysis. I would present it to them, and they constantly said, "Have you gotten your mentor to approve this? Like, what does he think of this?" Because they just didn't believe that I was right half the time, or they wouldn't trust what I did because I was a woman. And I saw my, male coworkers who I was mentoring, not have to deal with that same kind of activity. And so I was really grateful because at one point my male coworker, I told him, like my male like mentor, I told him like what was happening, and he came to a meeting and he sat in and listened to them, be like this towards me directly in a meeting and say like, I don't think this is right. Like this doesn't make sense. You don't know what you're talking about. And he chimed in from the back of the room and said, "No, Caeley knows exactly what she's talking about. And if you don't listen to her, your satellite will crash." And the whole room just went quiet. And I think that that kind of story, or the story where women are put in a room and constantly questioned, or not looked upon as equals, which is so unfortunate, is way too common. And we need more of those male allies and mentors in the workforce to help stand up for us, and help us build this out so we can create safer spaces.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly frustrating. Not having your work like taken seriously, and especially seeing like a completely different situation happening to like your male colleagues. It sounds incredibly just terrible. Um, so then you've kind of following up with that, you've been able to turn that around, and you're the founder and CEO of the Reinvented Magazine, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering young women to pursue STEM careers with a print magazine for women in science. So, kind of similar to the previous question, what compelled you to create this organization, and what are the goals that you hope to achieve?
Yeah, so I call myself an accidental founder, but every step since the inception of this organization has not been accidental, right? But I had just entered the workforce. I was dealing with those things that I just told you about. I didn't know how to change it for myself, but I knew that I kind of wanted to change it for others, or even just like was looking for this resource to have as someone who was now, seeing all the same things I dealt with in college, still in the workforce. And it was around that same time I got my last issue of 17 magazine in the mail. And thought, well, I don't really care about any of the content in this magazine. It was like the summer issue, and it was like the top 10 hottest men of the summer list, and like Justin Bieber was somewhere in the top. And I was like, I don't care about this. Why don't they have magazines for women like me who still care about some of the beauty and fashion stuff, but would much rather hear stories about professional women in STEM kicking butt in their fields, right? And so I complained in a group called NC Wit, which is a women in computing group online. It's like a relatively big, awesome, and supportive community. Um, and I just was like, midnight complaint, like, oh, why doesn't a magazine exist for people like us? Went to sleep, thought like it would just get lost in the void that is the internet. But instead, I woke up the next morning to like 1,000 comments and like thousands of likes. And a Discord server had been started by someone, and they were waiting for me to join. And when I did, they were like, great, Caeley is here. We're ready to help make this magazine with you. And I was like, that was not an action I thought I was going to take this morning, but here we are. And 5 years later, we're 17 issues in. And it's really crazy because we have geared our magazine down to a younger audience at this point, but I think it's incredibly helpful because they're seeing the powerful women that I am now also being able to meet as role models as the person running this magazine. And hear their stories and hear their advice and hear their career paths, right? And understand what they need to do to get to a similar position, understand the struggles and hardships that they overcame, how they overcame them, and then end it with their advice for if you want to be in my position in 5-10 years, this is exactly what I think you should do. And it's become really powerful to grow our readership to over 300,000 readers worldwide that are all now reading these stories of women that I get the honor of spotlighting and amplifying their voices.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible journey for your magazine so far, and especially being able to inspire young women in STEM in such a unique format. I'm actually part of like the NC WIT,
Yeah,
at least like the high school portion. So I
that's
think
awesome.
it's incredible, like having that like supportive community for women in science. It's super important too. So, have you faced any challenges throughout the creation of the magazine? And if so, how have you overcome them?
My gosh, yes. I think for starters, I'm an aerospace engineer. I know absolutely nothing about the world of making magazines. And so that was one of the biggest learning curves for me. We were able to connect with HP, who makes printers. And they helped us get a better understanding of what the printer industry looked like, how to print a magazine, what creative, like artistic guidelines and like layout items you need to have when you create a magazine. And they also helped connect us with a printer that walked us through the print process. It took us several print runs before we were able to communicate effectively and get it right. And we struggled a lot with understanding like different materials, how things would actually come out color wise based on the type of um, file you submitted to them. And so getting over that knowledge gap was a huge one. The second one, again, I'm an aerospace engineer. I am not trained in nonprofit leadership whatsoever. And so there were a lot of things that were just generally huge gaps for me. I knew how to connect with women in STEM. I knew how to write a story because I took AP literature and English in high school, but that was about it. I hadn't taken English class like my entire time in college. Um, I knew how to work with other women to empower them to work on this nonprofit, but I had no idea how to fundraise. I had no idea how to be a leader of a virtual group of volunteers. I had no idea what kind of roles and support I needed. I had no idea how to delegate even, or how to just run a meeting, right? I just started out of the, into the workforce. And there were just so many things that I had to learn personally how to do as not just a leader, but as a nonprofit leader. And I think I've come up to speed a little bit more since then, but it's still all just this one big learning process. Still a challenge, still understanding the ins and outs and figuring out what I can do to make the most impact with the resources that I have, and then how do I grow the amount of resources I have to continue making an even bigger impact. I think those are kind of consistent struggles across a lot of nonprofit organizations, but one for me more, maybe more so than others, because I don't have a background in this. I don't have a degree in nonprofit management, right? But I have a passion, and I have some incredible, incredible volunteers that all share that passion. And that is truly what has got reinvented to where we are today.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible journey. Sounds pretty like at least a little bit challenging at the beginning. Not necessarily knowing like let's say like I guess how to get that magazine out into the world. But then it sounds incredibly rewarding at the end of the day, being able to inspire so many young women with your magazine. So then also another challenge that you might face is you're also an aerospace engineer. And how do you find the time to balance a full-time job and managing this nonprofit? And do you have any advice you would give to young girls with ambitious dreams regarding time management?
Yeah, this is one that I consistently struggle with. And my boyfriend, who's sitting over here, probably would tell you that as well. Um, I I work a full-time job, and then I come home and I work what is pretty much the equivalent of a second full-time job, running like my nonprofit. Um, but one piece of advice that I always try and like tie myself back to is, there's almost 1,500 minutes in the day. And I have to believe that like I am worth at least 1% of them. And so this kind of, I think, ties back to like, it's not even work-life balance. It's just that idea of self-care and maintaining your own mental health. Because while I am really passionate about what I do at work and I love what I do, and I'm really passionate about what I do at my nonprofit, and I love everything that I'm doing, it's still so easy to get burnt out when you're doing so much. And then on top of that, you have other people that are requesting your time and attention because they're your friends, they're your family. I have two dogs that I would love to take on more walks than I do, or to play with more often than I do. And there's so many things that pull me in a million and one different directions. Um, and it's so easy for me or anyone, kind of seeing a similar schedule, to get caught up in, if I'm not working on one of those two things, I have to be focusing on one of the other things or one of the other people that is requesting my time. And by the end of it, you forget that you also need time for yourself. And so, like I said, I try to think 1% of my day I need to spend on me. If I am not worth at least 1% of my day to do something that has no impact on anyone but myself, whether that is sitting on the couch and binge watching some like really cheesy romance movie, or just like sitting at my window and eating a bowl of ice cream and reflecting on my day. Some people like to go outside and just like stick their toes in the grass. I have heard that is just like a nice one. My dog, his favorite thing is to go sit on our back patio and sunbathe, and so sometimes I just go out there and sit with him. But it's for me. It's something that helps me refresh my mind. That doesn't make me feel guilty for not focusing on something else. And I know that if I don't take that 15 minutes, I'm not giving myself the love that I need. And so that would be kind of my number one piece of advice, is when you are trying to balance all of this, don't forget about yourself. The second one, maybe invest in a really good planner, because I live off of mine and I can't even like leave the house without it. And so I definitely encourage you all to like find a method of scheduling that works really well for you, and then try your best to respect the boundaries of your schedule. You don't have something scheduled and you don't want something scheduled, don't like save yourself the time. There's no reason to schedule over it, right? So yeah.
Yeah, those are two great takeaways. Just being able to take that time for yourself is super important for your mental health, and it can also really help with your productivity to not like burning yourself out over time. Yeah, so if there's one final piece of career related advice that you could give to middle schoolers across the country, around the world, what would it be and why?
Yeah. Okay, so my number one piece of advice on this front is that engineering is hard. You will find people in engineering who, like we've already discussed, don't think you belong there because you're a woman. And because of that, so many women in STEM feel like they need to conform and like lose bits and pieces of their personality because they're too bold. too pink, right, to be in the STEM workforce. And in my 6 years of being in the workforce, I have found that being curious, being innovative, and being creative are the top three things that get you further and help you contribute more as an engineer, no matter who you are, where you come from, or what you look like. And so at the end of the day, you should never feel the need to compromise any part of yourself just to accommodate the feelings and emotions of others. And so you absolutely should go into work wearing your makeup and your bold lipstick. You should be wearing pink into the office if that's how you feel. You should be, putting yourselves where you want to be and sharing your ideas and being creative and not feeling like engineering has to be your whole life or you have to look a certain way. I run, like my nonprofit, we run a program called Princesses with Power Tools, and the tagline of that is "Brilliant is beautiful." And I think that that's really key as a woman in STEM. You can do both. You can do everything. You can be brilliant and beautiful.
Yeah, that's some amazing advice that I'm sure young girls around the world will be delighted to hear. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I've had a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you.